Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday, April 28th Working Group Component Standard meeting. I think we have one thing on the agenda today, which is this PR about maybe moving feature gates to staging, alternatively in component base. For some reason, this has been like a popular thing that a number of people have brought up recently independently. I guess mostly has to do with components moving out of tree or to other places and wanting to consume the centralized feature gate um, definition from somewhere common. Um, some people have wanted to like add new feature gates types, et cetera, et cetera. In most cases, I've kind of commented on those and said that, you know, it might be useful to have additional general machinery around feature gates, like some validation helpers, but component base is probably not the right place for the feature definitions themselves. I think that's a little higher level than what component base is intended for, which is sort of just the bare minimum expected, you know, sort of framework machinery for every component, not necessarily the definitions of the features in various components. So I don't know if folks have opinions on that.
Um, my opinion on this is from a user standpoint, and what I found traditionally frustrating has been when feature gates are needed to be supplied to multiple components. Um, our documentation does not surface which components implement which feature gates, and I think that this is something that needs to change.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe. I think this was confusing to me in the past, and I think it's been confusing to a lot of people, which is that the expectation around feature gates was that if you were setting a feature gate, you should just set it on every single component in the cluster the same, and just assume that the ones that implement it are doing the right thing because it's a cluster level feature.
this is fair to me. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that that's a fine. Um, yeah.
Yeah, but I do think it's helpful for like debugging and trying to understand what's happening to know like, okay, when I turn this on, which components do I actually need to look at to figure it out?
Yeah, I think it's helpful from a configuration standpoint, right, to be able to pass a global feature gate, right? That's something that is good UX from a tool that helps manage the system. But it is strange, right, like to not have any discoverability of the feature support.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Um,
think it
Components should have at least some method of advertising what
doesn't it
features
spit
they
out in the help text?
expect. Sorry,
Doesn't it come out in the help text
maybe
on
if it
some
does.
components? Not all components use the built-in. Like there's a flag registering helper in feature gates, I think, that some components use, but it forces you to use it's not compatible with like the component config sort of layering, backwards compatibility layering stuff. So I think that's what it was. Yeah, it does look like, at least on like API server, they all get put in the help text.
I believe that that's what I ended up reaching for when I've had to deploy feature gates before, is to look to see if the component talks about what it does.
Mm-hmm.
But it would just be less frustrating if at least those docs were published somewhere so that I don't have to go get those binaries before I know if I can do something.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, beyond like there's the help text on Kubernetes.io, but that's unversioned, right? Like it's hard to know actually what you're looking at.
Yeah, I some of the other frustration I've experienced here is just I'm not really personally a huge fan of the way our website is organized now in comparison to how it was before.
Yeah, I haven't really kept up with how it's changed over time, to be honest.
Before, like projects used to have their docs like all together. This was not great because things with overlapping categories were in multiple places, but now all of the it's categorically munged, and
Hmm.
installer docs are like all in the same place, and it's difficult to determine when you search for something if it applies to what you're trying to do.
Got it.
Um,
Yeah, I wonder what the appropriate form is to raise. There's like, I guess probably contribX maybe, or developer experience.
so in order to support an improvement in this area from a user and doc standpoint, what should we expect from components? Components should register their own feature flags.
At least report them in help text. It seems like it's a discovery of the existing documentation problem
Because
more
if
than
we
a
have docs and people can reference the docs, then they know what the feature gates are, and they can decide, and then we can determine how to deprecate feature gates.
right. I mean, there's already like clear rules around how to deprecate them. Um,
Yeah,
it may be a
it's really just the
discoverability
problem of
issue.
knowing, like
Yeah.
across multiple components, if it is deprecated.
Right. Yeah, and that's typically tied to Kubernetes version. So yeah, I guess without I mean, the way to, I guess, yes, to know that it's deprecated before it's removed, I think is the key thing, right? So that you know to migrate off of it. And
Yeah,
beyond mining release notes for a Kubernetes version, which is the only place that gets announced today, as there's no mechanism to log a deprecation notice if you're using a deprecated feature gate. There's no mechanism even to mark a feature gate programmatically deprecated, right? There's
yeah,
just there's just alpha, beta, GA states. So maybe adding a deprecated feature gate state, if that's a thing we want to discuss, is worthwhile. Like we have a way to mark a flag, right? I think that's maybe even a more general issue when we get into component config. Um, Although we have strong compatibility guarantees on those APIs about not dropping fields
yeah,
without changing a version. And so that's probably the more appropriate way to do it, is to like do it across versions.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's based off of the version of the component you're actually running,
yeah,
not
and
not on the version of the API,
right,
because feature gates is arbitrary.
right, yeah. I that which sort of raises an interesting question of whether in the future feature gates should actually just be a type. Like each, either it's a centralized, like this is the feature gate struct, and use struct tags to say whether things are alpha, beta, or GA. And then it's, you can include other metadata in that, right? Whether a field is deprecated or whatever.
I mean, in that case, we would probably version that struct in a
Right.
central spot, right?
Yeah, it would have to be.
So component base would be a sensible place to put it, or we could have a features repo. But
Maybe. So that's where it's like, so I feel like component base, it's a fine line with feature gates, right? On like one hand, yeah, it's like supposed to be this cluster wide thing that's like in every core component. Um, on the other hand, component base is kind of defined as like what you need to build a component, not necessarily like the features defined for the components. It's like we don't, there's a couple API types we put in component gates because they're incredibly common. So that's the argument for feature gates. But we also try to be non-specific,
Yeah,
right? Like,
the thought experiment in my head is for a another party implementing kubeproxy, which is something that people do. Then it's the kubeproxy related feature gates. Like, how do they implement those?
I'm not
And
arguing against exposing them in a separate
yeah,
repo,
in a different
right?
place. That's maybe just not
Like
component
a features repo in
features.
staging would be fine, I think.
Do we accept third party features in that repository?
No,
Okay.
that would only be core features.
So whatever people would want to bolt on, they could use component base, they could use the features repository, and then they could add their own features in there.
Yeah, I mean the current machinery lets you register arbitrary gates.
Yeah. And
So
if we were to move to a formal type, we would still need to support arbitrary gates.
yeah, which they could embed.
Yeah.
If they wanted. But I think I'm more resistant to moving to a formal type just because it's such a big change that doesn't seem 100% necessary yet.
I don't see. I think we could use like comment style annotations or something.
Yeah.
To do the doc generation portion of it.
I could see it. Well, I could see it after everything was fully migrated to component config and off of flags, but the backwards compatibility layer is going to suck to implement because you're going to have to do a bunch of reflection to translate flags to, or just write like a big manual mapping of all these flags to the fields. Like each like you have to parse the feature gates flag and then map each string to a field. So maybe we'd require feature gates to be registered with a pointer to a field or something, but I think that's maybe more complexity than is necessary, because we could also just extend the feature gate type to include the additional metadata we want. I think the advantage of moving to the type is that we have tools for versioning it. And it's sort of this like unversioned part of all these other versioned APIs, right?
Yeah. It is the playful sandbox for getting some indirection into your tool in a way that's open.
How would we handle there's this whole thing now about how features should either make it to GA or be removed, and the rules right about alpha and beta features are different than GA features. So if we have a GA version of API, it's sort of like called out currently, like, okay, but the feature gates part can change, and each feature gate has its own semantics of whether it's supported or not. I guess what we say for the core APIs is if a feature is alpha, you can add a field to the V1 API, but it has to be feature gated and clearly called out that might be deprecated.
I'm actually not educated on that. So you're saying...
So that's what we did way back when we did dynamic kubelet config. Because it has a field on the node object.
I see.
Right.
So you can extend the GA API with extra fields as long as the field is only actuated when the feature gate is present.
And I think the fields might live forever. I don't think, because we had one field that was like named differently or something. Pretty sure we deprecated something. We might have done it within within the span of a single release cycle. So we might have been able to rip it all out before it showed up. I can't remember, but yeah, I think that was the idea, was that as long as it was gated, and we can actually just look this up in the API conventions doc.
I certainly can recognize the problem here. It's a little, I mean, nodes have annotations and things like that, so it's a bit weird to not try to use that extension mechanism. But
yeah,
because it's not like you don't have options for passing values, you know, when like passing arbitrary things. We have other map fields.
Right.
And you can still do runtime validation on those things, just in line with the feature gate behavior.
Right. There's the API underscore changes.md doc has these rules, and it typically says
Yeah, not a huge fan actually of adding any fields for feature gates. I don't see why you couldn't just add a type that's non-accessible. The type can live inside of the API and be a good structure for the code. You can deserialize it from an annotation.
Yeah.
You don't get the API machinery part for free, I guess, right? You have to do your own serialization.
Is that much? I don't see why that's better.
Just, it's not, the conflict I see is that you have to parse feature gates. You don't have to, but it changes the strict serialization behavior.
Feature gates today deserialized or strict already, right? If there's a unrecognized feature gates, crash your.
Yeah, but if you add fields.
If you add fields,
then an API object that is versioned would succeed strict serialization in a newer version of the component, but fail strict serialization in an older version.
Strict serialization doesn't blow up on the absence of a field.
Or deserialization.
It just, deserialization just defaults the absent fields, even in strict. It only catches typos in field names, basically.
Exactly. It would. Well, so you're saying it's not a fatal error.
It's not a fatal error to get, or it's not a fatal error to not get gates that you would be able to recognize.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the gates. I'm talking about the additional fields. I don't like adding fields.
So like on a
support.
So if an old version got fields it didn't recognize, yes, that'd be a problem. Yeah. But that's already a problem, right? With every API that exists.
Mm-hmm. Adding new fields to the APIs.
Yeah.
Whether or not we really think that that's allowed.
For the API server APIs, components will just ignore fields they don't recognize.
Yeah, because the API server doesn't do any strict.
Right, and that's so that we can have version skewed upgrades. For component config, I think we made the decision that we wanted strict deserialization because it was, the config was already so closely tied to the component. Mm-hmm. I think that was the argument. So anyway, I think the question, the core problem was how to make feature gates more discoverable for users. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe let's focus on that. I don't know if it's a docs issue. I guess there's two problems. There's one, how to make it more discoverable. Two, stuff's moving out. So how does it, like if it's a core component moving to staging, how does it get access to this without importing KK?
Yeah, I mean, in general, is the attitude for refactoring KK. I mean, these shared bits, can we, as a community and an organization, can we support the number of repos that will explode from trying to factor it properly? Like, if we need to make a features repo and we need to make a auth support repo and we need to make, you know, like.
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer.
DocsGen.
I don't think I want us to be like NPM where we have like one line packages flying around everywhere.
Which features, is pretty close to that.
Yeah, it's basically a one file package. I see it. I mean, it already is that today. Like I see the argument for it, right? Like it makes it easy to consume. It's a common thing, and it doesn't really fit anywhere else.
And it's something that third parties would definitely import.
Right.
Because if you want to extend Kubernetes and you want to do feature gates, then you want to be able to register on all of those, or decide at least which ones you support. Okay, I'm convinced on features repo.
Yeah, I'm okay with the features repo.
I don't see that being a major issue. The GoMod stuff works well now because we have a versioning hack for GoMod.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else for today's agenda?
We LGTM'd the LD flags override, if I remember correctly, for the version library. Somebody popped in last week, I believe, and I just wanted to check. Do you know what I'm talking about, Mike?
No.
It was just a little bit up. Yeah, if you go to the WG component standard chat, then there was kubelet flags for the cloud provider, and then there was, oh wow.
Yeah, Savita looked like she was helping Knobin with that. Vincent got his PR merged, and it was going to do some more flags.
Yeah, Knobin's actually working on this right now. And then, gosh, where was that version override?
Yeah. All right, I think we're at time here.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool.
All right, so thanks for coming, everyone. Take care.